Okay.
Recognized menopause symptoms. MIDI clinicians are menopause experts. They're dedicated to providing safe, FDA-approved solutions for dozens of hormonal symptoms, not just hot flashes. Most importantly, they're covered by insurance. 91% of MIDI patients get relief from symptoms within just 2 months. You deserve to feel great. Book your virtual visit today at joinmidi.com. That's joinmidi.com.
Oh yeah, alright. Number one?
Nothing can be as isolating or confining as the woods. They seem to cut us off from the rest of the world, leaving us alone, balanced on the edge of being lost. Even in these thoroughly modern times, the woods seem to exist as a reminder that so much of the world is outside of our control. Sure, we could stay on the path, but those narrow routes between the trees only give us the illusion of control, like a trail of breadcrumbs. They're fragile and fleeting, and somewhere in the back of our minds we understand that if we were to leave the trail, we would be stepping into the unknown. The woods hide things from us. For centuries, criminals have used the dark cloak of the forest to conceal everything from bootlegging and poaching to drug use and murder. They hide wildlife from us and instill just enough doubt and mystery that we end up believing that anything could be living out there. Anything. Some areas, though, are darker than others. In some places, the woods are more than just a gathering of trees and undergrowth. There are locations in our world that are consistently avoided, plagued by rumor, and dense with fear. To step into one of these places is to abandon all safety, all reason, and all hope. I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore. Between the three Massachusetts towns of Abington, Rehoboth, and Freetown exists a triangular slice of land that has become home to hundreds of reports of unexplainable phenomena. It's known as the Bridgewater Triangle, though some call it the Black Triangle or the Devil's Triangle. They might not be swallowing up fighter jets and colonial-era ships like the Bermuda Triangle to the south, but its history is just as storied and mysterious. One of the areas within the triangle is the Hawkeye, a 10,000-acre wetland near Bridgewater, Massachusetts. In the 1600s, it was inhabited by the Wampanoag tribe of Native Americans, and the fort they built inside it became a strategic location for them during King Philip's War in 1674.
Alright.
One legend tells how during those times of upheaval and invasion by the colonies, a powerful artifact was lost in the swamp.
There's a totem.
Now, I can't find anything beyond a small Wikipedia
Lore
entry
podcast I
to
got running.
confirm
Oh my
this,
god,
but
everybody's like
the story tells
almost
how an
same
object
person.
known
I got
as
two
the Wampum
people,
Belt
two
was
twins
lost
tonight.
during the war, and as a result, the
Okay.
swamp became a home to restless spirits. Ever since, the swamp has been the source of a nearly of unexplainable sightings. One of the most dramatic and best documented reports was made by a local police officer, Sergeant Thomas Downey. On a summer night in 1971, Downey was driving home toward the town of Easton, near a place known as Bird Hill that sits at the edge of the swamp. As he was he caught sight of an Downey claims it was over 6 feet tall and had a wingspan of almost 12 feet. After reporting the sighting to the Easton police, he quickly earned the nickname of BLoodMOON. Now, I don't know about you, but it seems odd that a police officer would risk his reputation on such an unusual claim if it was just a joke. Officer Downey saw something that night. Just what that thing was, though, is open to debate. Decades earlier, in 1939, the Civilian Conservation Corps were working on the edge of the swamp near King Philip's Street. While there, workers claimed to have seen as round and black as a stovepipe. According to the report, the snake coiled for a moment, raised its head, and what wooded area would be complete without Bigfoot sightings? Although a tall, hairy creature has been sighted dozens of times over the years in various parts of the Bridgewater Triangle, common appearances have been near the swamp. In 1983, John Baker, a local fur trapper, had a similar experience. He was on his canoe in the swamp when he heard a splash. He turned to see, and I quote, "a hairy beast slog into the river and pass within a few yards of his boat." In 1978, a local man, Joe DeAndrade, was standing on the shore of a pond known as Clay Banks. He claimed that he turned and saw what he described as a creature that was all brown and hairy, like an apish man-thing. Oddly enough, I went to high school with a guy who fits that description. But there's been more than just weird animal sightings in the swamp. As far back as the late 19th century, locals have reported seeing unusual lights. One report was made by 2 undertakers who were traveling past the swamp on Halloween night in 1990. They claimed to have seen a light that hovered in the sky for almost an hour. Whether the reports of creatures and lights are true or not, it might be worth mentioning that the Wampanoag word Hockomock literally means the place where the spirits dwell. Another hotspot in the southeastern corner of the triangle is the Freetown State. If all the stories are to be believed, it's the quintessential haunted forest. Inside is a cliff known as the Asenat Ledge that overlooks an old quarry. There have been reports of hauntings near the ledge, of visions and ghostly figures. Some stories tell of a woman in white who lingers near the precipice. Others claim to have heard voices while visiting there. The most common report is of mysterious lights. Some researchers think they know exactly where those lights come from, too. They're the tools of a creature known as the Pukwudgie. In ancient Wampanoag folklore, the Pukwudgie is a small, forest-dwelling creature, something like a troll or a goblin, that lives in the wooded areas around the swamp. Aside from having one of the most entertaining names to say out loud, they are said to be small, hairy people, roughly 3 feet tall, and cause trouble to people who discover them. What kind of trouble? Well, Wampanoag folklore tells of how the Pukwudgies used lights to lure travelers into the woods, where they would kill them. These lights include the legend of the North American version of the English will-o'-the-wisp, sometimes referred to as ghost lights. The Pukwudgies use the lights as bait, luring people to their death. Rather than attacking hikers outright, apparently these creatures prefer Coincidentally, one of the most common experiences reported by visitors to the ledge is an overwhelming urge to jump. Normal, healthy people have felt nearly suicidal standing atop the ledge. Many of them claim upon approaching the edge of the cliff that they felt an almost uncontrollable desire to jump off into the dark, rocky water over 100 feet below. One story in particular bears retelling. Bill Russo was a welder from Raynham. He worked long hours, and for the 6 years prior to his retirement, he worked the late shift from 3 p.m. until midnight. By the time he got home from work each night, Bill's dog Samantha was in desperate need of a walk, and so before bed, Bill would take her out and let her get some exercise. They kept this habit up each and every night, no matter the season or the weather. On a night in 1995, Bill took Samantha out for their usual walk. Their typical route was to stay on the sidewalks and head toward the center of town. But on this night, they made a change. Bill decided on a whim to cut through his own backyard and head along a trail through the woods that ran alongside the swamp. Not a choice I would have made, mind you, even with a German Shepherd and Rottweiler mix as my companion. About half a mile into their walk, at a place where the path was crossed by a road, Samantha was odd. She was tugging at the leash and trembling, and kept glancing back at Bill with worried eyes. Bill pulled at the leash to lead her home, but the dog wouldn't budge. She just whined and quivered where she stood. After a moment, Bill began to hear the sound that had frightened his dog. It was a thin, high-pitched voice, faint at first, but growing louder as it continued. And even though Bill couldn't understand what the voice was saying, it kept repeating the same sounds. Iwachu, it seemed to say. Iwachu. It was midnight, in the woods. So, of course, Bill couldn't see anything. But he tried. He scanned the trees and bushes for whatever could be making the sounds. There was even a street light nearby, casting a small circle of pale light on the pavement. But he didn't see anything. And then suddenly, something stepped into the light. According to Bill, it was perhaps 4 feet tall, covered in hair, walked on 2 legs like a human, and looked to weigh no more than 100 pounds. It was naked and pot-bellied, and looked nothing like anything Bill had ever seen before in the swamp. And as it stepped out of the trees and into the light, it continued to speak to him. Iwachu, it said again. Kair, Kair. Bill and Samantha stood frozen to the ground, paralyzed with fear. And as the dog continued to whine and shiver, the creature lifted its arms and beckoned them to follow. Iwachu, it said again, motioning for them. Here. Bill claims that he tried asking the creature a few questions, but it only replied with the same nonsense it had already said. Not knowing what else to do, Bill managed to tug Samantha after him, and they both turned and headed home. They didn't look back.
Scary. Can you imagine coming across something like that?
It's not the trees that make the woods a frightening place. It's what the trees conceal. There's no telling what creatures hide behind the green leaves and thick branches of the forest landscape.
That's right.
Cryptozoologists, ghost hunters, and believers in the supernatural are often seen as abnormal. They believe in things that can't possibly be real. But when we step into the woods, when we surround ourselves with the dark embrace of the unknown, somehow the impossible begins to seem more likely. The maybe we want to know. Maybe that's what we get in the pit of our stomachs when we step into it. It's a cry for answers. There has to be something more out there, right? Maybe that's all we want to know. But we're simply too afraid of the answers. Bill Russo experienced that same fear on that night in 1995. He and Samantha managed to find their way home, but he was beyond shaken up. Even though it was 1 o'clock in the morning, he went into the kitchen and brewed himself a pot of coffee. There was no way he was going to let himself sleep that night. Cup after cup, hour after hour, the experience over and over again, playing back everything he heard and saw. Doubt and fear and regret. He wondered if maybe he should have tried harder to speak with the creature. Perhaps he should have approached it if Samantha would have allowed him to, that is. But the question that plagued him for most of that night was more difficult. What was the creature saying to him? Bill wrestled with his memory of the sound. Iwachu, it had said, and then Kier. Before sunrise, Bill was almost positive that he had his answer. It wasn't another language the creature was speaking after all. It had been trying its best to use English. And the words it kept repeating, "We want you," it had been saying. "Come here."
Darwin would approve. T-Mobile's network has adapted to so many locales. T-Mobile helps keep you connected from big cities to your hometown on America's largest 5G network. Switch now, keep your phone, and T-Mobile will pay it off up to $800 per line via prepaid card. Visit your local T-Mobile in Harrisburg or learn more at T-Mobile.com/keep-switch. Up to 4 lines. You look for device eligible carrier and unlimited required card no cash access required 6 months.
This episode was made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online. Whether you're scaling your business, Squarespace gives you everything you need to create a professional website, grow your brand, and get paid all in one place. I often tell people that I'm not just a podcast producer, but I'm also a former graphic designer. I know firsthand how tough it can be to craft a brand and website around who I am and what I do, but Squarespace makes it so incredibly easy. Squarespace gives you everything you need to offer services and get paid all in one place. Get paid on time with professional on-brand invoices and online payments. Streamlined and appointment scheduling. They even have email marketing tools. The actual listing of the website,
Alexa, play Lore Podcast Episode 8.
Playing Lore from Amazon Music. Resuming Episode 8, The Castle.
Got it, I found them all.
MattressWarehouse.com.
On January 17, 1894, a couple stood before a minister at the Vendome Hotel in Denver, Colorado. Henry Howard and Georgiana Yoke were about to be married. Lying near them was their witness, a woman named Minnie Williams. The bride had come from Indiana to escape a scandalous reputation and had found work in Chicago at a store owned by Henry. She was a tall, slender woman, about 25 years of age, with blue eyes and blonde hair, and she was madly in love with Henry. It sounds wonderful. It sounds perfect, actually. But there was trouble in paradise even before they met the minister there at the hotel. You see, Henry was already married. He was married to 2 other women, and Minnie, the woman standing as witness, was actually Henry's mistress of over a year. Even Henry's name was fake. His real name had been abandoned long before, and it would be months before Georgiana would discover who he really was. Sometimes we think we know a person, only to discover that we were fooled. Community is built on trust, and that trust allows us to make connections, to let down our guard, and to feel safe. We shift to disappointment, downright fear. And sure, it happens less often now in the age of Facebook and social media, but in the late 1800s, very little stood in the way of a person falsifying their identity. And Henry Howard, or whoever he was prior to that moment in Denver, had turned that skill into an art. Few people knew this about Henry, though. In fact, few people could have imagined what deep, dark secrets boiled just beneath the surface of this smiling man. When the world finally did find out, exactly 10 months later, they could barely contain their horror. I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore.
Hey girl, just wanted to stop by and say hello and hope you're having a good day.
His parents were wealthy, well-respected
Yeah.
people in their community.
Podcast about
And his son
H.H.
was born
Holmes.
into that privilege.
I got on now.
But at an early age,
I hope this is
Henry
episode
was a problem child, constantly getting
7.
into trouble. According to Mudgett himself, as a child, his classmates forced him to view and
Yeah.
touch a human skeleton after learning that he was afraid of the town doctor. Their prank backfired, though, generating a deep fascination rather than frightening him off.
It's too much noise
And
going
that
on
obsession
there.
with death
Happy
would
Friday.
Yes, happy Friday to
Student
you,
boy was
Jet.
expressing interest in medicine.
There's a few podcasts on this Lore podcast. It's the only one I listen to. I don't really do podcasts that much. I like Lore, that's about it.
Pursue that interest and enter medical school and enrolling at the University
There's
of
a few
Michigan
good ones in
as
here. I just got
H.H.
done
Holmes
listening to this
in
one.
1979.
Man,
Far from home and with access
it'll
to
send chills
resources
down
that
your
he
fucking
could
spine. There's a lot of them.
college allowed Holmes to get creative. He devised an easy way to make money, a drive that would fuel many of his future crimes. Holmes would disfigure the corpse, plant the body somewhere that gave it the appearance of being and a few days later, he would approach the life insurance company with a policy for his deceased relative and collect the cash. His final insurance swindle was $12,500. Nothing was very fair. After collecting the money, he vanished, abandoning school and his new wife and child, whom he never saw again. He moved around the country doing legitimate work, but also learning his way around the business world. He mastered the art of buying product on credit.
I can't get enough of this BLoodMOON.
Selling the items and then vanishing.
Playing the hell out of it. I already finished the tome, so I'm working on other
just south of Chicago.
challenges.
And that's where he met Dr. Elizabeth Holmes. It was 1885. Holmes was trying to avoid creditors from all around the country. But rather than vanish into obscurity, he chose to hide in plain sight. He married his second wife, polygamously of course, and took a job at a local drugstore owned and run by Dr. Elizabeth
Get back here.
Holmes spent the essential to Holden's business and building relationships with the customers. When Mr. Holden finally did pass away, the payments from Holmes stopped, and Mrs. Holden became upset, threatening to end their business partnership. But nothing happened. Nothing happened because Dr. Holden mysteriously vanished. When asked about her disappearance, Holmes told the authorities She had moved to the West to live with her family right after she had signed over the business to him.
Damn, we sacrificed for me this round.
Bought the lie. Holmes operated the drugstore as if nothing had happened, growing the business and continuing his chess game of evading creditors. But when the empty lot across the street became available, he couldn't resist the temptation. Holmes, you see, had bigger plans. The World's Columbian Exhibition was scheduled to be hosted in Chicago in 1893, and he envisioned a hotel that could house the countless visitors who would travel. His project was lovingly called the Castle, which wasn't far from the truth. It was 50 feet wide and over 160 feet long, taking up half a city block. With 3 stories and a basement, it would eventually have over 100 rooms within its walls. And Holmes, ever the micromanager, took on the task of project architect, refusing to share the plans with anyone else. Workers on the building asked questions, naturally, but when they did, Holmes would replace them. Most of the men working on the project never lasted more than 2 weeks. And all told, over 500 carpenters and craftsmen worked on the castle. True to form, Holmes managed to avoid paying most of them as well. He would accuse them of shoddy work and refuse their wages. Some sued him, but he managed to put those cases off long enough that they eventually gave up. And once completed, Holmes moved the drugstore into the new building's ground floor and rented out space to other shops.
Oh, that's twisted. It's fucking up again. I thought I had fixed it. Apparently not.
And the remaining space was rented out as temporary living quarters, marketed as a boarding house for young single women. The castle was open for business. Unfortunately, not everyone who stayed there managed to survive the hospitality that Holmes offered them. When Mrs. Pansy Lee arrived from New Orleans, she rented a room at the castle. She was a widow and had traveled all over the United States before arriving in Chicago to settle down. When Holmes learned that she kept $4,000 in cash in the false bottom of the trunk, he kindly offered to keep it in his store vault for her.
Sure he
Mrs.
did.
Lee declined the offer, but vanished a short time later. While some people came to the castle for lodging, others were looking for work. One of the requirements that Holmes imposed was that all his employees were to have life insurance policies for the sum of $5,000. Holmes, remember, knew the life insurance business well. So when 17-year-old Jenny Thompson arrived from Southern Illinois looking for work, Holmes saw an opportunity. She was young and pretty, the exact sort of blonde-haired, blue-eyed beauty that he preferred, and he quickly gave her a job. In casual conversation, Jenny let slip that her family didn't actually know where she was. She had told them she was traveling to New York, but the offer of a good job was enough to keep her right there in Chicago. She told Holmes that she couldn't wait to tell her parents about her good fortune.
Down with all these old
Before she did, though, he escorted her up to her room, and she was never seen again. In 1890, Ned Connor arrived at the castle looking for work. He traveled with his wife Julia, who was unusually tall for a woman at the age of 2, and a young daughter Pearl. Ned was a watchmaker and a jeweler, and Holmes hired him right away. But it was Ned's wife who captured his attention most. Holmes soon fired his bookkeeper and gave the job to Julia. Not long after, it began to be obvious that Holmes was more than a little friendly with Ned's wife. Ned, for his part, turned a blind eye. It seems he was simply glad to have a good job with steady pay and a roof over his head. When Julia became pregnant, though, Ned finally took the hint. He packed up, filed for divorce, and left her and Pearl in the care of Holmes, who immediately took out life insurance policies for both of them. But Holmes had a new problem. Julia knew the business too well, and she presented a threat to his illicit activities. Holmes found a solution, though. He told Julia that he would marry her, but only if she would have an abortion. Julia resisted at first, but finally, on December 24, 1891, she gave in. She asked Holmes to put Pearl to bed, and then he led her to the basement, where he had a makeshift operating room. Julia and Pearl were never seen again. That same winter, Holmes summoned a man named Charles Chappell to his office. Now, Chappell performed odd jobs around the castle, but he had a particular skill that Holmes required. He was incredibly gifted in the craft of articulating skeletons. Chappell arrived, and Holmes led him to a second-floor room where the body of a woman lay on the table. According to Chappell's own testimony to the authorities, the body had been skinned like a jackrabbit. He assumed, since Holmes was a doctor, that he had simply been performing an autopsy on a patient, and pushed his doubts to the back of his mind. Holmes paid Chappell $36 to strip the flesh off the body and prepare the bones for articulation. The finished skeleton was sold to a Dr. Pauling of the Henneman Medical College. Dr. Pauling would often look at the skeleton in his private office and marvel at how unusual it was to see a woman who was nearly 6 feet tall. Holmes eventually made a critical mistake. Ironically, it was his old love of insurance scams that caught up with him in the end. After killing his right-hand man, Benjamin Peitzel, and attempting to pass the death off as an accident to the insurance company, the authorities caught wind of the crime and tracked him down. He was finally arrested in Boston on November 17, 1894, 10 months to the day from his wedding ceremony in a Denver hotel. Before his trial began, however, the castle was mysteriously gutted by fire. Thankfully, the authorities had already been able to search the building, and after doing so, they had given it a new name: the Murder House. The authorities discovered that, like any boarding house at the time, the castle had a reception room, a waiting room, and many rooms for residents to live in. But the building had more inside its wall than was expected. There were secret chambers, trapdoors, peepholes, and hidden laboratories. Aside from the 35 guest rooms, the second floor was a labyrinth of passages. Some doors opened on brick walls. Some could only be opened from one side, and others were hidden completely from sight. Trapdoors led to staircases that led to hidden chambers. And there were even alarms in all of the rooms that would alert Holmes in his quarters if any prisoners tried to escape. Some of the rooms were windowless and could be sealed off and made airtight if necessary. Some were equipped with gas jets that were fed by pipes from the basement. Others were lined with asbestos and had visible scorch marks on the floor. And then there was the vault. It was a room that could fit a single person, and only then would it be. The walls inside the vault were lined with iron plate, broken only by a handful of gas fixtures, and a trap door that led to a chute. On the inside of the door was a single footprint, the size of a woman's boot. It was a homemade gas chamber that was designed to deliver corpses straight to the basement. And when the police descended to the lowest level of the building, they discovered that Holmes had expanded the basement beyond the foundation of the building and out beneath the sidewalk. He did this to make room for all of his equipment. Here they found the dissection table, still splattered with blood, jars of poison on the shelf, and a large wooden box nearby contained multiple female skeletons. A crematorium was built into one wall, which still contained ash and bone fragments. A search also found valuables that belonged to some of his victims: a watch that belonged to Minnie Williams, scraps of fabric, tin-type photographs, and a ball of women's hair carefully wrapped in cloth. The bones of a child were found buried in a pit, and the remnants of a bloody dress were recovered from the wood-burning stove. When Ned Connor was asked to identify the fabric, he confirmed it belonged to his wife, Julia. A raft designed to stretch bodies was also discovered. Beneath the dirt floor, they found a vat of corrosive acid and 2 quicklime pits, used for quickly dissolving flesh off of corpses. There were human skulls, a shoulder blade, ribs, a hip socket, and countless other human remains. Whatever the police had hoped to find that day, they were simply unprepared for the truth. In the end, they had discovered a medieval charnel house right beneath their body. It's easy to feel safe in our own house, past the closed doors and manicured lawns. But what goes on behind those walls is never something that we can be sure of. Each and every person we meet wears a mask, and we're only allowed to peek behind it if they let us. Society is built on the idea that we can trust the people around us. We can take our neighbors, our family, even our coworkers at face value and enter into relationships with them. But with every relationship comes risk. We risk disappointment. We risk pain and betrayal. For some of us, we even risk our very safety. The European map makers of the 15th century would sometimes mark unexplored areas of their maps with a warning. Here, there be monsters. There's danger in the places we haven't explored. And while this was true then of undiscovered continents, it has always been true of men. Beneath the surface, behind the mask, hides the monster. On May 7, 1896, after a final meal of boiled eggs, dry toast, and a cup of coffee, H.H. Holmes was led to the gallows at Moynihan Prison. A black hood was placed over his head, and as the crowd outside the prison walls shouted their insults and jeers, he was positioned over the trap door. When it opened, Holmes dropped and his head snapped to the side. But rather than killing him quickly, the rope had somehow broken his neck and left him alive. The crowd watched for over 15 minutes as Holmes hung from the noose, fingers and feet twitching and dancing, before his heart finally stopped beating. Holmes was buried in an unmarked grave in Holy Cross Cemetery, just south of Philadelphia. As per his request, there was no autopsy. His body was buried in a coffin filled with cement. You see, was afraid that someone would dig up his body and use the skeleton for science. And he was probably right. We don't know how many people he killed. Holmes confessed to a variety of numbers, even changing his story again on the hangman's platform. Some experts who have studied the missing person reports of the world's Colombian expedition have placed the possible death toll as high as 200. There's so much we don't know about Holmes, a man whose entire life seemed to be one elaborate lie without another, like some macabre house of cards. And he will forever remain a mystery to us, a monster hidden behind a mask that was easy to recognize like you or I. But one last insight into the man can be found in his confession. I was born with the devil in me, he wrote. I could not help but guess that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing. I was born with the evil one standing as my sponsor beside the bed where I was ushered into the world. And he has been with me since.
From ancient Rome to where you'd like to roam, T-Mobile's network is there. Because T-Mobile helps keep you connected. From big cities to your hometown.
I have to go to the locker to get more nuts.
T-Mobile will pay it off up to $800 per line.
Or whatever the hell that is that I
Visit your local
use.
T-Mobile and transfer. Or learn more at T-Mobile.com/keep-and-switch.
Blades, my blades.
This episode was made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or scaling your business, Squarespace gives you everything you need to claim your domain, showcase your offerings with a professional website, grow your brand, and get paid all in one place. I often tell people that I'm not just a podcast producer, but I'm also a former graphic designer. I know firsthand how tough it can be to craft a brand and website around who I am and what I do, but Squarespace makes it so incredibly easy. Squarespace gives you everything you need to offer services and get paid all in one place. Get paid on time with professional on-brand invoices and online payments. Streamline your workflow with built-in appointment scheduling. They even have email marketing tools. And the actual building of the website, it doesn't have to be daunting. Squarespace has cutting-edge tools that are meant to give you the boost you need
and
to
the
craft
other
a
just
beautiful
go at
site
about the same
around
time.
you and your brand. Gorgeous templates, drag-and-drop editing, and personalized design recommendations. They will help you.
Yeah.
So good. Plus,
Oh,
Squarespace
hell
Domains
yeah.
makes it easy to find the best name for your business at one fair, all-inclusive price. No hidden fees or add-ons required. And every Squarespace domain comes with advanced privacy and security tools to ensure your domain stays online and protected. Get started today. Head over to squarespace.com/lore for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LORE to save 10% off your first purchase.
Alexa, play Lore Episode 6.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Alexa, play Lore Episode 6.
Playing Lore from Amazon Music. Resuming episode 6. Echoes.
Alexa, restart the podcast.
I can change the playback mode only when music is playing.
Son of a bitch.
But they left the front facade of the Kirkbride building with its soaring Gothic towers and...
Alexa, restart.
Restarting episode 6. Echoes.
There we go. Thank you.
From ancient Rome to worship like to Rome, T-Mobile's network is there. T-Mobile helps us reconnected from big cities to your home on America's largest.
Woohoo!
Keep your phone. T-Mobile will offer $800 per line via prepaid card. Visit your local T-Mobile or learn more at T-Mobile.com/keep-and-switch. Up to 4 lines. New virtual prepaid card last 15 days. Qualified month device credit service 14, 90 plus days. Device eligible carrier and time encryption required. Card is no cash access and expires in 6 months.
Toyota is the best resale value brand for 2025, according to Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com. And with a wide range of dependable vehicles for any lifestyle, you can get everything you need in a vehicle today while investing in tomorrow. So choose Toyota and choose value. Shop buyatoyota.com for great deals and more. Vehicles projected resale value is specific to the 2025 model year. For more information, visit Kelley Blue Book's KBB.com. Kelley Blue Book is a registered trademark of Kelley Blue Book Program.
44.
Toyota, let's go places.
I wonder what, if you have an add-on, I bet there is. There's an add-on. I bet for him that you can carry a whole shitload.
The setting of a story is everything. It creates mood and atmosphere. It triggers memories. It helps our minds fill in the blanks, adding tension and suspense where there was only words and images. What would The Shining be like without the long hotel hallways of the Overlook? Or The Legend of Hell House without the dusty bones of the old Alaska house? And how can anyone ever look at an old cabin in the woods without a chill running down their spine? That's for sure. One of the most iconic and most visceral settings from any horror story, without question, has always been the insane asylum. These days, we refer to these institutions that treat mental disorders as psychiatric hospitals. They're hard places to work. I know this firsthand thanks to a colorful college internship that featured a double amputee who enjoyed streaking down the hallway on his knees. Mental health professionals do amazing work. But a lot more than just the name has changed for these hospitals of the mind. In the late 1800s and through to the 1950s, asylums were a very different place. They were filled with sick people in need of help. But frequently, they were only offered pain and suffering. When H.P. Lovecraft wrote The Thing on the Road in 1933, he imagined a place that he called Arkham Sanitarium. Arkham is the key. It's the first of its kind. Through it, Lovecraft brought the asylum into the horror genre, and others quickly caught on. The famous super prison and mental hospital of the Batman universe, Arkham Asylum, is a blatant and direct callback to Lovecraft's invention. Arkham was a real place, though, known as the Danvers State Hospital. In fact, the remains of it stand just 8 miles from my front door. And even before construction began in 1874, the hospital story was already one of fear and suffering.
I just got as a dev trophy.
Unchecked.
Oh,
Well into the 20th century. I'm Aaron Mankey, and this is Lore. Before the days of institutional care for the mentally ill, the job was left largely to independent contractors, people who were hired by the state to look after others. But that was a system with far too many opportunities for failure. Patients were routinely placed in cages or stalls, and they were chained and beaten into submission. Violence, rape, and death were everyday occurrences. Thankfully, people began to look for a better way, a more humane way of caring for these individuals. And those conversations led to the establishment of a new, state-of-the-art mental hospital. Plans started off on the wrong foot, though. The site that was chosen for the construction was the former homestead of John Hawthorne, one of the 9 magistrates who oversaw the witch trials of Salem in 1692. Hawthorne was known for his vicious, harsh attitude toward those who were accused of witchcraft, and he pushed hard for their execution. He was so well known for his violent, hateful personality that his great-great-grandson, the author Nathaniel Hawthorne, changed the spelling of his last name, adding the W, to distance himself from that reputation. And it was there on Hawthorne Hill that the foundations of the hospital were laid. The chances are pretty high that no one made the comparisons at the time, but hindsight is always 20/20, and looking back over the last century and a half, it's clear that Hawthorne's legacy lived on atop that hill. The Danvers State Hospital was actually intended to be a beacon of hope. There was a specific plan behind its design, one that was based on the work of Dr. Thomas Kirkbride. He designed the building with 4 radiating wings on each side of a central structure. His reason was simple. With more of the rooms exposed to sunlight and proper ventilation, more patients would experience recovery. All told, the hospital was designed to house 500 patients covering a wide spectrum of mental illness, who were served by a team of roughly 12 staff. When the doors finally opened in 1878, it was originally called the State Lunatic Hospital, and there was no other place like it in the country. It was set up to be a leader in the humane treatment of patients, and became the model for countless other facilities like it. And rightly so. This place was amazing. The ornate interiors, private rooms, sunny corridors, all connected to the central Kirkbride building. The patients were encouraged to exercise and participate in the community gardens outside. The small farm there even produced enough food for the hospital kitchen to feed the patients homegrown meals. Over time, though, the hospital expanded. There were separate tuberculosis buildings, housing for staff, a machine shop, a medical building, and a pump house to pull water from the reservoir. All of these locations were connected underground by a network of dark, brick-lined tunnels arranged in the shape of a wagon wheel to allow easy movement during the harsh New England winters. But the hospital campus wasn't the only thing that was expanding. As with all good things, the bright days of the Danvers State Hospital didn't last long. More and more patients were admitted each year, and staff continued to struggle with keeping up. In addition, decreased state funding prevented them from hiring more help. In the 1920s, the population had grown to over 2,000 patients,
Blood
4
moon.
times what the facility was designed to hold. One eyewitness reported that in November of 1945, the evening shift of the hospital consisted of 9 people, and they were expected to care for the needs of more than 2,300 patients. You'll have to pardon the expression, but things at the Danvers State Hospital had begun to get crazy. Patients were frequently sick and filthy. It was not uncommon for some to die unnoticed, only to be found days later. It was nearly impossible for the staff to manage so many patients, and so they turned to the acceptable tools of their time. Straitjackets, solitary confinement, even restraints. However barbaric they might seem to us today, were mild compared to some of the other methods used by the staff. Patients were regularly subjected to hydrotherapy and electroshock therapy, and yet it somehow still managed to get worse.
I love
That's where
the
the
way.
lobotomy enters the story.
Okay, here we go. Let her try out here.
First pioneered by Dr. Walter Freeman in 1936, the lobotomy was a complicated procedure. The surgeon would literally cut the patient's brain, severing the connection between the frontal lobes and the thalamus. The goal was to relieve the symptoms and make the patient more manageable. The results were mixed. Some patients died as a result of the procedure, while others would commit suicide later. Freeman, though, quickly retired how long it took to complete the procedure. He heard of a doctor in Italy who had operated on his patients through their eye sockets. Working without drilling or cutting presented an opportunity that Freeman simply couldn't pass up. He called his technique the transorbital lobotomy. It's fairly easy to describe, but it's not for the faint of heart. Freeman discovered that the only surgical tool he really needed was an ice pick. According to his son Franklin Freeman in a PBS interview in 2008, those first ice picks came right out of the and it worked like a charm. By inserting the ice pick into the inner corner of a patient's eye, Freeman could punch through the skull to reach the brain. Then he would essentially stir the frontal lobe until it was no longer functional. Oh, and one more thing. He did all of this without anesthetic. And he got good at it. So good, in fact, that he took his show on the road. He literally toured the nation in a van that he called the Lobotomobile, stopping at mental institutions where he would educate and train the staff in his own technique. While he was there, he would perform as many lobotomies as they needed for the low cost of just $25 per patient. It sounds like Freeman was delivering the solution to a desperate industry, and that was pretty far from the truth. His patients often lost the ability to feed themselves or use the bathroom unassisted, and those skills would have to be retaught, if it was even possible. And while many patients recovered, about 15% died from the procedure. Relapses were common, and sometimes the lobotomy would have to be reattempted. Once, in 1951, at Iowa's Cherokee Mental Health Institute, Freeman stopped in the middle of a lobotomy, ice pick clutched in his hand, so that he could pose for a photograph. The instrument penetrated a bit too far, and the patient died. He never wore gloves or a mask, and he really had no limits. In fact, of the 3,500 lobotomies that he performed in 23 states, 19 of those patients were minors. One of them, a 4-year-old child. Ironically, some people still don't believe and monsters. The horror of institutional lobotomy ended in 1954 when a new drug was brought to the market. Thorazine was marketed as a chemical lobotomy, and the need for the surgical procedure dropped dramatically. But the nightmare never really stopped at Danvers State Hospital. During the 1980s, reports began about missing teenage patients. One account I managed to find said that upwards of 115 patients had disappeared in the space of about 3 months. The hospital never spoke about it publicly because their closure was already looming on the horizon. They knew.
Whoa.
When the staff was questioned, they all pointed to a new doctor on the staff. In each case, they said these patients had been assigned to this new doctor upon admission and then vanished. Scraps of paper were found in several of the patients' rooms that mentioned a tall man and woods. Some were drawings of the man, and some were simply too illegible to make out at all. As the pieces were slowly put together, it became clear that the doctor had been taking patients outside of the building without permission for unknown reasons. Eventually, the police were called, and when they arrived to take the man into custody, they found that he too was gone, and his patients were never found. But this was just one more tragedy in a long string of bad news that had wrapped itself around the Danvers State Hospital beginning in the 1960s. Massive budget cuts, building closings, and structural damage all conspired to slowly push the doors closed. By 1985, nearly every building on campus was abandoned, and the Kirkbride Administrative Building itself even closed in 1989. The last remaining patients were moved to the medical building on site, but were all eventually moved to other facilities with the National Guard and 80 ambulances. The hospital was officially abandoned in the summer of 1992 and stood vacant and derelict for nearly a decade. The rooms that once played host to mindless victims of Dr. Freeman and his ice pick became the home of homeless squatters. They built their lives around the decaying medical equipment, wheelchairs, the bed frames. It was probably the healthiest inmate population the building had known for decades. In 2005, the property was purchased by a developer, and much of the campus was demolished to make way for a sprawling apartment complex. But they left the front facade of the Kirkbride building with its soaring Gothic towers and intricate brickwork. But the hospital, it didn't go quietly. In April of 2007, 4 of the apartment buildings, as well as a handful of construction trailers, mysteriously burned down. It was a fire so big that it was visible from Boston, 17 miles to the south. There was an investigation, but it turned up no evidence, other than webcam footage from the construction site, which inexplicably cut out just before the fire began. The idea of an asylum will forever hold a place in our hearts as something to be feared and avoided. Whether new and sunny or ancient and decaying, the asylum is a setting that causes people to back away, a ball of terror rising in their stomachs. But why? On a rational level, these were places of hope for many people. Still, the very concept of a residential hospital for the mentally, complete with 19th century decor and equipment, is the stuff of nightmares. Perhaps what we really fear is losing control over ourselves. Restraints, locked rooms, medication, and irreversible medical procedures represent for many of us the opposite of freedom. We fear losing our dignity, losing our well-being, losing our very minds. Death, however, chasing all of us. The reality is that we are already handing those things over, day by day, until the time when there's nothing left to give. Perhaps the stereotypical asylum simply reminds us of the inevitable truth. It is our own death. The Danvers State Hospital is nearly gone today, but reminders still linger of its presence. Besides the brick facade of the Kirkbride building, one of the roads there is even called Kirkbride Drive. The reservoir that provided the facility with its water can be found behind the apartment buildings, and that vast network of ancient tunnels is still there as well, snaking its way beneath the modern structures and the people who live inside them. One final reminder awaits people who come for a visit, though. The old asylum cemetery. It's where the staff buried patients who died in ways unclaimed by family. There are no tall tombstones, though. Instead, each grave is marked by a small square stone with a number engraved on it.
Oh, they're upstairs.
And there are
Oh,
hundreds of
there's one there.
anyone looking for the
Boom, 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 boom.
they found it. When they see a large boulder
Come here,
that marks
you.
the entrance. It is placed there in recent past to explain why all those small square stones are there. But it's the message engraved on it, and not the grave markers themselves, that communicate everything you need to know. It simply reads, the echoes stay up behind.
So sad. Put you there.
This episode was made possible by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform designed to help you stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or scaling your business, Squarespace gives you everything you need to claim your domain, showcase your offerings with a professional website, grow your brand, and get paid all in one place. I often tell people that I'm not just a podcast producer, but I'm also a former graphic designer. I know firsthand how tough it can be to craft a brand and website around who I am and what I do, but Squarespace makes it so incredibly easy. Squarespace gives you everything you need to offer services and get paid all in one place. Get paid on time with professional on-road invoices and online payments. Streamline your work schedule, built-in appointment scheduling. They even have email marketing tools. And the actual building of the website, it doesn't have to be daunting. Squarespace has cutting-edge tools that are meant to give you the boost you need to craft a beautiful site around you and your brand. Gorgeous templates, drag-and-drop editing, and personalized design recommendations, they will help you look so, so good. Plus, Squarespace Domains makes it easy to find the best name for your business at one fair, all-inclusive price. No hidden fees or add-ons required. And every Squarespace domain comes with advanced privacy and security tools to ensure your domain is online and protected. Get started today. Head over to squarespace.com/lore for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LORE to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Squarespace. Build something beautiful. This episode of Lore was researched, written, and produced by me, Aaron Yankee. Lore is much more than a podcast. There's a book series in bookstores around the country and online, and the second season of the Amazon Prime television show was recently released. Check them both out if you want more lore in your life. I also make 2 other podcasts, Aaron Yankee's Cabinet of Curiosities and Unobscured, and I think you'd enjoy both.
Oh,
Each one
somebody's running
explores
around.
other areas of our dark history, ranging from bite-sized episodes to season-long dives into a single topic.
Alexa,
Learn about
Play Lore episode 15.
Playing Lore from Amazon Music. Here's episode 15, Unboxed.
From ancient Rome to where you'd like to roam, T-Mobile's network is there. Because T-Mobile helps keep you connected. From big cities to your hometown on America's largest 5G network. Switch now, keep your phone, and T-Mobile will pay it off up to $800 per line via prepaid card. Visit your local T-Mobile in Harrisburg or learn more at T-Mobile.com/keep-and-switch. Up to 4 lines, you virtual prepaid card in 15 days. All funds online device credit service working 90 plus days. Device eligible carrier and time redemption required. Card is no cash access and expires in 6 months.
Window Nation customers have been singing our praises for years. With fast local service and an industry-leading 96% customer satisfaction rating, it's no wonder. I've researched window companies for years to see what the average prices were and the quality
Boo. Boo.
Now get 4 windows free with every 4 you buy. Plus, no interest.
Over here, I can get there. You're gonna be out in the rain.
Schedule a free estimate now.
Get out in the rain. Okay, there you go.
That's 866-98.
My great-grandmother was a painter. She picked it up late in life, but she produced dozens and dozens of oil paintings once she hit her stride. They're mostly still life studies and landscapes. They're not Dutch masters by any stretch of the imagination, but to our family, they're precious. They connect us to her. Because of this, those paintings have become a centerpiece of her extended family. Generation after generation now makes room on their walls for as many of these framed treasures as they can acquire. People have a way of becoming attached to things. Maybe it's the long journey that these objects accompany us on through our lives, or perhaps it's due to the feelings they can invoke when we see them and touch them. Or maybe, deep down, we understand that even though our lives might be fleeting and temporary, these things, these objects we love and revere, seem to live on after we're gone. This habit of attributing personality and emotion to our possessions is something known as anthropomorphism. We give human characteristics to things that are far from human. People name their cars and talk to them like an old friend. Others will say that their house has a lot of nervous energy. They don't, but at the same time, they do. You know? The best place to see this practiced in action is in the presence of children. The toys they cherish, the ones that follow them from room to room, or lay in their laps on long car rides, or get pulled under the covers with them at bedtime, those objects take on a personality of their own. Oftentimes, it's just a game. Other times, it's a coping mechanism for loss or fear. But sometimes, on very rare occasions, these objects seem to set the rules themselves. They pick their own personality. They guide the children's decisions, as if someone or something were controlling them. I'm Mary Mankey, and this is Lore. In 1982, a backhoe operator was preparing a building site for development in Titusville, Florida. While working on one of the ponds, he noticed what he thought were rocks visible in the mud. But something didn't sit right with him, and so he climbed out to take a closer look. What he had thought to be stones actually turned out to be bones, specifically a human skull. The county medical examiner was brought in, but it became clear almost immediately that the bones belonged to someone who had died a very long time ago. When Florida State University became involved, they uncovered, so to speak, the truth. The bones belonged to a 3-year-old girl who had died more than 7,000 years before Florida had become a state. It was clear that she had been buried by her parents, though. They had wrapped her in cloth made from local plant fibers, and then placed her in a shallow grave. But she wasn't alone. with her in the ground, placed near her arms in case she wanted them, were her toys. It seems that children have had toys, objects that they loved and played with, for thousands of years, perhaps tens of thousands. The toys were still rare. In a world where everyone had to contribute to the well-being of the community, even the children were expected to grow up fast and do their part. When they did have toys, they were often basic in shape, such as marbles or tops. They would also play with objects meant to represent the things most important to their village or clan. Toy animals, soldiers, religious icons, all are commonly found objects for archaeologists in the graves of ancient children. Interestingly, the ancient Greeks expected children to give up their toys when they came of age. Young women would actually take their toys to the local temple on the night before their wedding, where they would offer them as a sacrifice to the gods. These rules began to shift after the advent of the Enlightenment in the mid-1600s. Society became more affluent, and children weren't expected to work as often as they had previously. In addition, their toys became more complex and useful. Jigsaw puzzles were born in 1767 as a way of teaching geography, and board games from the same period were meant to entertain. Toys had evolved. But not all of it. Across cultural boundaries and spanning thousands of years of art and technology, there has been one constant in the world of toys. From the tombs of the pharaohs in Egypt to the shelves of Target down the street, one toy has maintained a universal and timeless appeal. Dolls. They're little representations of us, after all. They personify the people we love and provide comfort to the lonely in a way that no other toy can. And because of that, people get attached. Children refuse to put them down. And even in adulthood, dolls have a tendency to be kept around. Sometimes, though, the roles are reversed. As unhealthy as it sounds, there have been more than a few stories of dolls, not children, who refuse to let go. They seem to take control, to set the tone, and dominate the lives of the people who own them. And sometimes, have been frightening. Thomas and Minnie Otto were a well-off and well-traveled couple who had a deep love of the arts. They were natives of Key West, Florida, and in 1898, they completed building a brand new home there on Eaton Street. 2 years after moving in, the couple welcomed their third child to the family, a son they named Robert Eugene. They called him Gene, and the family quickly settled into their leisurely lifestyle. They had more than enough money, and they spent it on convenience, which included a staff of caretakers around the house. Cooks and maids were always ready, including a woman from Jamaica who worked as a nurse. History doesn't remember her name. If you were a woman in 1904, that was pretty common, unfortunately. It was pale and European. So we don't know her name. But we do know that she loved him. She spent hours with him every day, traveling with the Otters on their journeys around the country, caring for him like a turn-of-the-century version of an uptown Manhattan nanny. She was close to him. And that's probably why she gave him the doll. It was big, about the size of a 4-year-old boy, in fact. It was filled with straw, hand-sewn, and dressed in a white sailor's uniform. And Gene loved it. He took it everywhere with him, on travels abroad and on day trips with his mother. It was said that Gene even sometimes wore a similar outfit, and the two seemed like siblings. Gene called the doll Robert, using his own first name, and their relationship got off to a storybook start. The doll had its own chair near the dining room table, and Gene would sneak little pieces of food to it as the family ate. During bath times, the doll would be placed on a dry towel near the tub while Jean played in the water with toy boats and corks and all the usual things that little kids love to do. And at the end of the night, Jean would bring Robert to bed with him, and the two of them would be tucked in together. Everything about this is normal. My own children do similar things, naming their dolls and bringing them along for car rides. But for Jean, that's where the normality stopped, because not long after he was routine with his new toy, things got weird. And according to most reports, it all started with talking. Jean's parents would often hear their son's voice coming from his bedroom as he played. Even though he was in there alone, it would always sound like he was in deep conversation with someone else. First they would hear his voice, sweet and tiny, and then another voice would reply, different and rougher than his own. Oftentimes the second voice would sound insistent, while Jean's would almost sound unnerved and flustered. Of course, Jean's parents assumed it was a game, and that he was simply playing make-believe. But over time, they began to second-guess that presumption. During a few of these apparent conversations, Jean's mother would quietly approach the boy's room, and then, without warning, she would burst into the room. Inside, she found her son cowering in a corner of the room, arms wrapped around his knees, while Robert the doll sat on the bed or chair. She couldn't be sure, but it seemed to her like the doll was glaring at the boy. Things escalated from there. The Ottos awoke on a number of occasions to the sound of Jean screaming in his bedroom. They would rush to his room, only to find him sitting on the bed, furniture in the room overturned and his belongings strewn about. According to Jean, Robert was to blame. Robert, the doll glaring at him from the foot of the bed. Robert did it became a common phrase around the Otto house after that. They didn't believe their son, of course, but the boy blamed the doll for most of the unusual activity. When his parents found toys that appeared to have been mutilated or broken, Jean said that Robert had done it. Sometimes the Ottos could hear giggling from somewhere else in the house. Sometimes this happened at night, and each time when Jean was supposed to be in bed. Dishes and silverware were often found thrown about on the dining room floor. Clothing would be found on the floor, appearing to have been shredded by some unknown person. Sometimes servants would enter unused guest rooms only to find that the bedding had been disturbed and pushed off to the carpet. The staff would even find themselves locked out of the house when making their nightly rounds. If Jean was clearly not at fault, sometimes the servants themselves were as a result, turnover at the time, with a constant rotation of servants coming and going. One constant through it all, though, was Robert, the unusual doll in the white suit. And according to some reports, he did more than make a mess. He may have killed. Hearing giggles from inside the house was one thing. Sure, it would unnerve most of us. I know it was but the Ottos soldiered on, putting up with the repeated excuses. They were strict parents, maybe even a little overbearing by today's standards, and were always quick to find for mischief. It was one thing to make a mess, but staff was hard to train, and having them frightened away all the time wasn't congruent with their convenience, and so they punished Jean. To the boy's credit, he appeared to have been a true believer in his stories. He would put up a small fight, blame the events on the doll, and then take the consequences like a responsible child. But there were other reports about the doll, and these were things that could in no way be blamed on the Otto boy. Visitors to the house reported that the doll would blink. Some of them claimed to have heard the laughter themselves, and at times the Otto family wasn't even at home. Neighbors said they would sometimes see the doll in the upstairs windows, moving from one to another, glancing out through the curtains toward the street. Servants would find Robert in a completely different part of the house from where he had been left moments before. Sometimes the sounds of small, little feet could be heard moving from room to room. All of this became too much, and extended families began to find a solution. One of Jean's great aunts visited the family to plead her case. The doll was cursed, she said. Some evil spirit lived inside it, and if they wanted to be rid of the house in random episodes of disturbance, they needed to get rid of the doll once and for all. On her recommendation, Robert was taken away from Jean and placed inside a box. The box was then moved to the attic of the large house, out of sight and, at least in theory, unable to cast his shadow of fear over the house anymore. Next night, the aunt was found dead in her bedroom. She was an older woman, and so the official story that she had died of a stroke was passed around and believed by all, but the Ottos themselves didn't buy it. Out of fear for their own safety, Robert was put out of storage and returned to their son's side. And that's how things remained. As all kids do, though, Jean eventually grew up. He trained as a painter, traveled throughout Europe, and eventually married an accomplished pianist. But after his parents passed away, the couple moved back to Florida and took up residence in his old childhood home on Eaton Street. Jean spent his days painting, and his wife Anne settled into domestic life. And somehow, in the middle of it all, according to the reports, was Robert. Rumors in town spoke of how the doll had a place at the dining room table, a chair beside her bed for him to sit on during the night, and that Jean had a habit of taking the doll with him as he moved about the house. There were whispers that his wife Anne hated the doll. Unnerved by the presence of the doll so close to their marriage bed, it was said that she stopped allowing Jean to bring it into their room. And for a while, he complied. Robert was locked back in the attic, but according to reports, that didn't help. Robert would sometimes be found sitting in a rocking chair downstairs, even though he was supposed to be locked upstairs in the attic. The couple would hear footsteps in the attic at night and a soft, distant sound of laughter. Local legend claims that all of this drove Jean's wife insane, eventually ending her life. The study of folklore often encounters the same patterns throughout the world and across the centuries. One common theme that we see is the dehumanization of people of minority status. The witch trials stand as a somber example of this, where the accused, often women, often poor, and often social outcasts already, were stripped of their humanity and treated like animals and monsters. Robert the doll, though, stands on the opposite side of the spectrum. Rather than being one more tale of someone having their humanity stolen from them, Robert, a cloth and straw doll without a soul, appears to have had humanity bestowed upon him. Why? It's hard to say. Perhaps it's because Jean Otto's parents needed an excuse for their son's unusual behavior. Maybe it was a culture of superstition brought into the house by servants with ethnically different backgrounds. Somehow, a living, breathing Robert was an easier story to swallow than the alternative. We'll never know for sure whether Jean Otto invented it all. He passed away in 1974, with Robert at his side. For a while, the house remained uninhabited, unless you count Robert as a resident. But eventually a new family moved in and made the house on Eaton Street their own. They restored a lot of the original charm of the house, and in the process, they found a doll. Maybe they were compelled to, or maybe they had heard about it from locals. But for whatever reason, the new family packed up the doll and moved it to the attic. Eventually, though, the family donated Robert to a local museum. But it wasn't charity that motivated them. It was fear. You see, not long after moving in, they began to experience odd things. Things that Jean Otto would have known all too well. Soft hands, light footsteps in the attic, and random, unexplainable messes. The family's 10-year-old daughter reported that the doll would appear in the house on its own, and on a handful of occasions had even tried to attack her, a claim that she holds to even now as an adult. But the final straw happened later, when the girl's parents were awoken in the middle of the night. In the darkness of their room, they could hear laughter and the sounds of movement. Alarmed, one of them flipped on the bedside lamp, only to feel their hearts stop. There, at the foot of the bed, was Robert's doll, a kitchen knife in his hand.
From ancient Rome to winter Mexico, T-Mobile's network is there. Because T-Mobile helps keep you connected. From big cities to your hometown on America's largest 5G network. Switch now, keep your phone, and T-Mobile will pay it off up to $800 per line via prepaid card. Visit your local T-Mobile in Harrisburg. Or learn more at T-Mobile.com/keep-the-switch.
The tuna.
Start playing and shut off.
Welcome to Tuna.
It's tools in the hands of their specialists. It means addressing complex and urgent cases, delivering compassionate primary care, and bringing personalized care close to where patients live.
We played from these 4 artists right here on X.
Homestead Structures supports XPN and is currently working with homeowners on the design of their custom-built pool houses. Homestead Structures works with each customer on their own unique vision for their outdoor living space from planning phase to completion. To learn more about the process and meet with the Homestead Structures team to be ready for summer, it's homesteadstructures.com. It's back! Homegrown Originals, our vinyl collection of music celebrating local artists, returns this record store day with Volume 3. The album, a free gift with purchase at select independent record stores around the region, brings you exclusive performances from the Key Studio Sessions, Free at Noon, and Exponential Music Festival. Regular faves like Vanity Pussy,